Hello, everybody. This is Greg Anderson, and welcome to episode 1 of our new podcast on the book Life, Love, God, The Story of a Soul Traveler by Norman Paulsen. So, we're going to be going through this book chapter by chapter this year. Probably once each month we'll have a podcast on this book. And I'd like that book to be available for you. So, at the end of this of the slides that are involved in this podcast, you'll see the links and where you can get the books. And I would encourage you to get the book. Next month we're going to do chapter 2, and I'd like you to have pre-read that and meditated on some of the ideas that are brought forth in that chapter. Where did this book come from? Well, Norm Paulsen was a direct disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda, and he joined Yogananda towards the end of Yogananda's life. Norm entered the monastery at Mount Washington in 1948, and as some of you may remember, he passed early in 1952. So Norm had left the monastery, and a little less than 20 years later had begun building a World Brotherhood colony in the Santa Barbara area. And as he attracted literally hundreds of young people to this community, Brother Norm was encouraged by his community members to write down his own story. Norm told his editor, Sandy De Silva, that Divine Mother wanted him to write a book about his journey to spiritual illumination and about the development of a World Brotherhood colony near Santa Barbara. At this particular time in his life, in the late 70s, Brother Norm was suffering from multiple health problems, and in my mind, he probably felt an urgency to get all of his stories down on paper, because he felt that his physical body might possibly give out and his lifespan might be shortened. So he asked Miss Sandy De Silva to move to the community to act as his assistant in getting this project completed. So Sandy acted as a typist along with Barbara Mackay, an editor, a proofreader, as well as doing the design and layout. And when I interviewed Miss De Silva last month, what I realized was this was the old day of printing. I mean, they typed everything up and they pasted it on paper, and then they had to put it on these boards for the printer. And if there were any errors in the proofreading, they had to retype an entire page, or they had to cut and paste words and paste them up. So it was a very long, tedious process in those days. But the first book came out in 1980, and it was titled Return of the Ancients. In 2002, it was edited down to Christ Consciousness, and in 2016 to this very compact Life, Love, God. So what's changed with the book? Well, virtually nothing has changed with the book, but what happened is, as we realized that Norm was going to stay with us longer than the 1970s, some of these stories did not exactly apply to his spiritual journey. And so those stories that he wrote down that did not apply to his spiritual journey have been removed so they can be used in another publication. And so Life, Love, God is basically been boiled down to the story of one person's journey to find God in his life. Now, when Sandy arrived at Sunburst Community to take on this job, and it was then at Tahigas Ranch, she explained to Brother Norm, "I don't possess the skills needed for this project." And his answer to her was, "Don't worry about that. Divine Mother will show you everything you need to know." Later, Sandy was told by others who were present at that first meeting that they witnessed a golden cord or a golden thread that extended from Brother Norm across the room to Sandy. It was evidence to them that Sandy had been chosen to help Norm with his project. So in the introduction, I picked out a paragraph that I thought kind of sums up Norm's thoughts about why this book was created. And here's what Norm said. I have been encouraged to set down in this book that which is truly beyond words to describe. I do not expect the reader to believe or disbelieve my experiences, but only to examine them in the light of his or her own understanding. Incredible as some of them may seem, they are absolutely true. It is my hope that this story be an inspiration to others who, like myself, seek answers to divine truths. I further hope that it might offer direction to those who will accept nothing short of a direct, personal experience of God and give some idea of what could transpire in their lives. So this book definitely changed my life. I came to Sunburst for a yoga retreat in the last decade, and I never left. And one of the reasons I never left is I picked this book up and read it the first 3 days that I was at Sunburst, and it changed how I thought about everything. The thing that struck me was how human Brother Norm was, that he was just like you and me. And he wasn't shy about explaining to people that his life had not been perfect. He would say that, well, I barely have a high school education. I was a simple bricklayer and stonemason, and I've struggled at times during my life with destructive behaviors that many of us have experienced. But this makes his message even stronger and more promising for each one of us. If he were to describe his fundamental message to us today, it would be, if I can find God, anyone can find God. So we enter chapter 1. And in chapter 1, Brother Norm writes, and I'm going to read this because it's from his first chapter, and it's his experience of basically remembering his spirit body entering our physical realm here on his way to his mother's womb. So he had a complete and utter remembrance of his infancy, or his pre-infancy. So here's what he wrote. O bright blue pearl of Mother Earth, we hear, we know, we come. Thy call of anguish penetrates the stars. From space, the sphere of thee doth fill our vision up. O Mother's watery world of life, we come to help support you. We are descending. Beneath us lie the waters and the land. This sphere, a celestial garden floating in space, is unmatched in beauty. Where the winds and waters meet the rising of the land, a jagged point appears. In fact, that's what you see in the slide here. Tall cliffs and rocks challenge the heaving bright blue waters. Above us, the radiant body of Father Sun watches in silence as Mother Earth performs her daily revolutions. My life and love flows outward and downward to mingle with visions of crashing waves and torrents of spray. Rainbow images dance in clouds of mist, slowly settling upon glistening monoliths of stone. I encompass all that I feel and observe, moving onward towards the east. So Brother Norm wrote about writing this chapter 1. He said, this chapter exists in my consciousness as a visual memory recall, vivid, with vivid images, sounds, and colors. So he in his description of this travel of his spirit body to his new home talks about Point Conception, which you see in the slides. He says, Point Conception, long known to native peoples as the western gateway of the spirit world, contains an ancient necropolis. The western gateway, a graveyard for earthbound ships, thrusts forth their stricken bows, caught in its awesome beauty. It's the point where winds and currents meet and ancient spirits move, fog-shrouded at times, mysterious and deadly to mariners. So, those of you that are not familiar geographically with this area along the Santa Barbara coast should be aware of the fact that what he's referring to here when he talks about mariners and ships with bows crashing. He's referring to a 1923 naval disaster where 7 U.S. naval destroyers ran aground at Point Conception, killing 23 sailors in one night. So Norm remembered his birth and was able to witness the geographical landscape of his new home as his soul traveled to its final destination in this incarnation, his mother's womb. He goes on to describe the land, the trees, the San Ynez River, the oceans, the streets, the homes, the animals, and the people. As Brother Norm's astral body migrated to his parents' home in Lompoc, he saw his earthly father-to-be walking down the street. He wrote, "The blind man walked with a white cane, feeling the earth beneath as he moved. He was stalwart and precise. Deprived of earthly vision, his hearing was acutely extended. He heard the message of the whispering wind and the babbling brook as he extended his life outward into all beings and images around him. He found me, standing there on the street in the midst of life. My spirit image flashed before his inner vision. I had startled him. He stopped walking to stand alert in a silent greeting. Time stood still for him. He spoke, 'You have finally come to help me, to be my eyes in this world.' 'Yes,' I replied. He went on, 'I am so very sad and lonely here. No one understands me, no one. My wife tries but finds me too withdrawn in the spirit.' Norm's spirit replied, 'Long have we been friends, and again we meet. My spirit is fixed upon rebirth here. Our lives must be joined together for a time.' So Charles Paulsen, Brother Norm's father, lived in a house on K Street in Lompoc, California. His lifetime of blindness had led to extreme increases in his other senses, including his sixth sense, intuition. His heightened sense of intuition allowed him to be aware of his son Norman's impending birth and the travel of his spirit. In an article in the Lompoc Valley Historical Society's publication, they described Charles Paulsen this way: composer, philosopher, counselor, pianist, organist, accordionist, jurist, legal advisor, broker, salesman, lecturer, and humorist, was born in his family home in Miguelito Canyon. He graduated from the State School for the Blind in Berkeley in 1911. He attended the University of Redlands for 3 years and studied law at LaSalle University and George Nix Law School in Los Angeles. After years of playing piano and organ accompaniment for silent films at the Opera House and at the New Lompoc Theater, Paulsen practiced law and was the Justice of the Peace in Lompoc for 14 years. So, Norm's father was often referred to as the Blind Buddha, as he was one of the first Americans to be ordained as a Buddhist minister. He served as a minister at the Buddhist Center in Avila Beach, California. He also, it's not mentioned in the article from the Lompoc Valley Historical Society, but he's also a piano tuner. And you see a picture of him here. He tuned by ear because his sense of pitch was nearly perfect. On the right, you see a picture of the White Heron Sangha, which is a Buddhist retreat that still is in Avila Beach, California today. So when Norm's father was completing his training in concert piano in Pasadena, the local newspaper wrote several articles about his incredible senses. The article pointed out that he was able to hear buildings, curbs, traffic, and water puddles, and never walked with a cane. And this is when he was at the university. When he studied philosophy at the Redlands University, many of the students did not even know he was blind. As a side note, while playing a piano concert in Pasadena, Charles met his wife, Norman's mother, Eileen. So I don't know about you, but I have memories that go back to about age 3 or 4. I can remember my grandfather quite vividly, and he passed away when I was 4 years old. So I remember him giving me coins at the end of the day and dropping them in the heat register on the floor of my grandmother's house, much to her chagrin, and picking strawberries with him out in the garden. But before 4 years of age, I don't remember much at all. Yogananda had a similar experience to what Norm experienced. And this is what he wrote in Autobiography of a Yogi. He said, "I find my earliest memories covering the anachronistic features of a previous incarnation. Clear recollections came to me of a distant life, a yogi amidst the Himalayan snows. These glimpses of the past, by some dimensionless link, also afforded me a glimpse of the future. The helpless humiliations of infancy are not banished from my mind. I was resentfully conscious of not being able to walk or express myself freely. Prayerful surges arose within me as I realized my bodily impotence. My far-reaching memories are not unique, though. Many yogis are known to have retained their self-consciousness without interruption. If a man be solely a body, its loss indeed places the final period to identity. But if prophets down the millennium spake the truth, man is essentially an incorporeal nature. The persistent core of human egoity is only temporarily allied with sense perception. Although odd, clear memories of infancy are not extremely rare. During travels in numerous lands, I've listened to early recollections from lips of voracious men and women." Yogananda, in his travels, had met many people he believed were telling the truth, that remembered their infancy and remembered past lives. So what he's saying here is it's not rare. Here's how Brother Norm this is his memory of this tiny new body that he had, and it's similar to Yogananda's in many ways. He said, and this is Brother Norm, "On the 3rd day of February 1929 at 12:46 p.m. in Santa Barbara, California, I experienced birth in the garb of the earth. I was conscious. Some say this is impossible. I say, to those who believe, no explanation is necessary. For those who don't, no explanation is possible. I, as a spirit, lost no consciousness in entering the planetary body of the earth elements. I can, to this day, look back through the fabric of time and space into times past. Life is indeed a continuum. So is consciousness a never-ending stream. My newly extended limbs were cumbersome. The senses of sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch assaulted my consciousness painfully at times. At night, I floated out of the body to be with friends. I didn't like the restrictions of a body, ball, and chain." So here, in just a few pages, we learn from Brother Norm's experience that he'd had previous incarnations. So the reader is led to understand right away that reincarnation is a true principle. He talks about our consciousness and that it's a never-ending stream. And it's true. Our consciousness of lifetime after lifetime sits in our subconscious, and Norm was blessed with the ability to bring that forth and remember his previous incarnations. Norm was also blessed with a father whose gift of intuition he was able to share with his son and help his son develop it. Norm also introduces us to his grandparents, who also lived on K Street in Lompoc. Because Charles, Norm's father, was born blind, he was sent away to a school for the blind in Berkeley, California. And because of this, he barely knew his brother, his sister, his parents, because he only saw them once a year for just a couple of days. So when Charles senses his son's spirit approaching him on the street in Lompoc, and he says, "I've been alone, I'm lonely, there's nobody that understands me." He'd been alone pretty much a good part of his life because of his blindness. In those days, people were treated differently, and he was sent away from home, away from his family. There are several things that Brother Norm remembers about his father as an infant and a toddler. And there were two activities that molded Brother Norm's spirituality. And one of those would be listening to his father play the piano. There was a favorite composition that his father had written called Shadow Dance. And Brother Norm remembers as an infant listening to his father's fingers move around the piano and think that pure spirit's being expressed through my father's fingertips. Also, listening to his father's stories was another pastime. His father created bedtime stories of a character of Norm called Coyote Boy, and also of Captain Norman and his friends, as a way to teach his son how to visualize mental images and how to demonstrate the strength of living with morality and virtue. In these stories, Captain Norman and his friends sailed through the universe on a starship called the Golden Dawn to help worlds where people might need help. So many years later, Norman and his friends sailed the Golden Dawn as a living reality. This image here shows the 158-foot schooner, the Golden Dawn, that Captain Norm and his friends sailed from San Francisco Bay to Santa Barbara. When I first came to Sunburst, one of the questions I had and often sought answers to in meditation was, why am I here? How did I end up here with all these good people? And then an event occurred in a meditation, and I relived that event over. It had happened many years ago. It involved my youngest son and his friend. They had been surfing all day, and I picked them up. It was dark, and they were hungry, and we went to a restaurant in Santa Maria to feed the boys. And in this meditation, I was experiencing this dinner all over again exactly as it happened. But this time, I was shown something that I had forgotten. So during that dinner, I felt as though someone was staring at the back of my head. I turned around and I looked at the booth behind me and across the aisle. A man was staring at the back of our heads, both my wife and I, and his eyes met my own eyes for just a second. But this time, in my meditation, I recognized him. It was Brother Norm and his wife Patty. The answer to my prayer in meditation was clear. Brother Norm was still gathering his friends. And I believe Brother Norm is still today, even though he passed from his physical body in 2006. He's still today gathering his friends from previous incarnations to help move God's work forward. So here's how you can order your copy of Life, Love, God. You can find it on the Sunburst online store, and you can order it from Amazon.com. So next month, we will cover Chapter 2, Now We Are 3. Goodbye, friends.